I hope everyone's doing well today. My name is Nolan Massarello, and today I'm going to be discussing Dante's Inferno, Canto 15. And so I wanted to start by discussing the setting of Canto 15. It takes place in the seventh circle of hell, because this canto addresses the general sin of violence, and this is in the seventh circle. More specifically, this canto addresses violence against nature, or violence against God, and sodomy. And so there are a couple different important characters in this canto. Um, Obviously, the main one being Dante himself, uh, who is traveling through hell. But the other characters are Brunetto Latini, who is a former mentor and teacher of Dante that he ends up meeting in this circle of hell. These sodomites, these are the sinners that committed unnatural acts against God and nature. So they're the ones being punished in this circle. And then we have Virgil, who has been along on this journey, guiding Dante through hell. So throughout Dante's Inferno, we've seen several different punishments that correlate with these sins. And for these sinners, obviously their sin was violence against nature or against God and acts of sodomy. And so their punishment is a flaming desert. The desert that they're walking through is endless, and there's these flames that are falling from the sky and they burn them. And then the souls cannot stop walking, or else they'll be punished further and unable to shield themselves from flames for 100 years. So each aspect of that kind of correlates with the sin. I'll get into it further later, but there are those three distinct parts: the fact that the desert is endless, the flames that are falling from the sky, and the fact that they cannot stop moving. If you really wanted to, this canto could be just broken down into one major event, because there is only one other character besides Dante and Virgil. But I decided to break it into 6 different parts, just because I think that they help place emphasis on the important details of the canto. So the first is the burning sands. Dante and Virgil walk along the desert where the flames are falling. They actually have to take a path alongside the river to protect themselves from the falling flames. The next part is soul recognition. There's a group of souls that approach Dante, and then they stare at him for a while, and then one of them recognizes him. And this person is Brunetto Latini. Dante and Brunetto knew each other on Earth, and so they speak candidly. And Dante shows a lot of respect for Brunetto's teachings and respects him as a father figure, which is very important. The next is the prophecy that Brunetto has for Dante, and he tells Dante that he may suffer for his beliefs, but to stay true to them in life. The next, I guess, event you could say is Brunetto and Dante's conversation, which is the main event of this canto. But the next section of this conversation is when they discuss the punishment of the souls in this circle. And Brunetto explains that those who were violent against nature and God are damned to walk the flaming desert. And the last event, which my camera is kind of covering right now, Brunetto discusses immortality through literature, and then he disappears into the desert. And since this canto is mainly about one character, I wanted to dive deeper into it because really the majority of this canto is just the conversation between Dante and Brunetto. So it would make sense to look deeper into Brunetto Latini. One of the things that is clear through their conversation is that Dante shows a lot of respect for his mentor. And the fact that they speak candidly and plainly is very important as well, because it's different than how the other cantos are written. there's a lot more plain speech, and the conversation goes very naturally, all things considered, like especially for the fact that they're in hell. Like when Dante recognizes Brunetto, they have a very normal conversation for being in hell, and this just kind of shows their relationship, that they were very close and that Dante respects Brunetto. And then Brunetto expresses to Dante that Dante was always destined for greatness, which is another important thing about Dante, is that ever since he was young, he was told that he would be this great figure, and he always was seeking this certain level of greatness, I guess. And Brunetto also tells him that Dante will meet cruelty back on Earth because of his politics. And Dante thanks Brunetto for being a strong paternal image, and he thanks him for what he taught him. He assures Brunetto that he's ready to face whatever backlash he experiences in life, and then he moves on to ask about the other souls there. And Brunetto says that many of them are clerics and men of fame, and they were all prone to the same desires. And this is another indication that the sin in this canto is not necessarily homosexuality, which is a common belief because it is stated that it is the sin of sodomy, but that's a much broader sin than just homosexuality, which the Catholic Church does not like. But there there's a lot more to Dante's Inferno and the description of sodomy than just homosexuality. And it seems to indicate, at least through the language, that it's more about lustful moderation, and there's other varying aspects. And so one of the other themes of this canto is the idea of the sin of immortality, specifically through literature. And so a common question that comes up is, why is Brunetto in this circle of hell if it's reserved for sodomy? And at first I was a little bit concerned because sodomy in this era was very common between older men and younger boys, and Brunetto being like the mentor of Dante, I was worried that that might be um, something, but it doesn't seem like anything is pointing towards that. It seems to be more about Brunetto being unnatural in the sense that he seeks immortality. And so some speculate that it's not actually sodomy or being lustful, but instead it's his sin of immortality or seeking immortality. And obviously, this is very unnatural. The whole idea of Christianity is that you live and you die, and then based on how you lived, your afterlife is determined. And Brunetto seeks immortality through his literature. He specifically tells Dante that he lives on through his book, The Tesoro. Even though he's in hell, he's alive on earth because of his writings. And as I just said, that concept is, it kind of goes against Christianity, the idea that you could live beyond the grave. And interestingly, Dante is tempted the same way as Brunetto. He doesn't explore it as much in Inferno, but from what I was looking at, he does explore it more in Purgatory. Um, but Dante kind of seeks this fame, and he wants to live on through his writing in a way. So it's interesting that he would choose to write about Brunetto being in the circle of hell, most likely because of his seeking immortality, and Dante himself is seeking something similar and succeeded, because I mean we're talking about Dante today and he's no longer alive. So I do think that is a very important aspect, and I also like just the human aspect of him having a father figure in Brunetto. So one of the things we want to do when looking at these cantos is to look at the punishments and to see how they correlate with these sins, see what Dante is saying and see how they work metaphorically. Um, and so the sin of sodomy, that is a tricky one because there's so many different ways to sort of interpret what this circle is for and what this sin exactly is. But the sin of sodomy in this case is not exclusively used for male homosexual sex. It's also a reference for the grooming of young men because this is um, like like that in that era, that was a more common way that sodomy took place. And then also, it's important to note that Dante does not make a distinction between homosexual and heterosexual sinners. So it's strongly indicated that it's more about a lack of control, a lack of sexual control that leads people to being punished here. And the punished are then forced to walk through an endless desert while flames fall from the sky and burn them, and they cannot rest. And so the way that these correlate, the endless desert, I think it sort of represents the life that the punished were leading. The endless desert is the empty void, like their shallow and lustful pursuits. And also sand is a common way to measure time, the grains that fall. And like if you ever held sand in your hand, you can't even count all those grains, let alone a desert. So it gives this very, I guess, awestruck feeling of how vast the space is that they're trapped in. And then another important factor is the fire falling from the sky. This is just very unnatural, which the whole point of the circle is that it's for people that acted unnaturally or against God. And fire from falling from the sky is very unnatural. In nature, water falls from the sky, and I guess you could say the antithesis to water would be fire. So it seems metaphorically to make sense to have fire raining down from the sky as punishment. And so, in conclusion, there are a couple key points I think to take away from this canto that makes it a significant one. Um, and one of them is that it does not distinguish between heterosexual and homosexual lust. I think that's a very important detail, and it's very interesting for this time, all things considered. Um, and as I said in the slide before, it's just interesting that the emphasis is just on the lust aspect and not so much the homosexual aspect, which I know, having been raised in a parochial school, the emphasis is very much so on like the homosexual aspect of it. But it seems that Dante sort of puts it on the same level and he doesn't distinguish between the two, which is very important. Canto 15 also actively avoids sexualizing the punishment of the sinners, which is interesting because in later cantos, some of the punishments and imagery is a lot more sexual. But for for these punishments that are specifically linked to sexual acts, it's very desexualized. The punishment is walking through a desert with flames falling on them. So it's just an interesting takeaway. And it's also an interesting canto because it's sort of an exploration of Dante's upbringing and his relationship with Brunetto, seeing him as like a father figure, and also the fact that Dante was always told that he was destined for greatness. And it's also interesting seeing Dante's views on fame, legacy, and immortality through fiction, especially considering that we're reading his work today. Anyways, thank you guys for listening, and I hope you guys enjoyed.